right, Dr. A.J. Keaton, come here. The dopest, one of the dopest in the country. Give her a hand. Fight the power. Fight the power. A.J. played point guard at Colorado State.
For the Rams.
Master's degree at University of Texas, PhD at UConn. Professor now at University of Louisville, about to take a job at UMass-Amherst. She wrote the dopest article on Angel Reese in women's basketball that I have ever read. So she's up and coming, she's powerful, and she is one of y'all, a former student athlete. So let's give Doc a hand. All right.
I'm just going to be honest. This session is less for the professionals and it's more for the athletes. I study this, I follow this, and I was so proud of Aaliyah to know that there was one speaking out. Again, we're not asking you to jeopardize your scholarships, but we need some consciousness rising in here. Because if your state passes a ban, y'all will not be here unless you have private funds. Let's keep it a buck. A lot of our athletic departments don't have private funds like that. So these DEI bans are really attacking state resources. They're dealing with the injury. It's state resources because if the state says we have to remedy your issues of sexism, racism, homophobia, then what else is the state responsible for? It's a weaponization. We've been here after Reconstruction. We've seen it after the Civil Rights Movement. And I think a lot of us in here do not know that we are in a moment. Your coaches were wearing BLM shirts 4 years ago. I haven't seen a tweet. I study this, I follow this. Your athletic departments were organizing rallies and marches. I have not seen a rally or march for anti-DEI legislation. So really, when we're having this conversation, I need the athletes locked in because we're taking this space for granted. Just some history here. There was a time where 1,000 athletes, we used to get stressed about 50 of y'all. Now there's 1,000. And so think about how a DEI ban can hinder what is so beautiful in this space. So lock in, I want notepads out, notes, and we're about to drop some knowledge for y'all. So first up we have our panelists here, Dr. Darren Kelly, Associate Vice President and Dean of Office of African American Affairs at the University of Virginia. Next up we have here Sheridan Blanford, Associate Athletic Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Next up, we got Dawon Baker, Associate AD, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, University of Colorado University, excuse me. We have Dr. Blair Hackworth, Director of Inclusion, the NCAA. And last but not least, we have my friend here, went to CSU together, Lorenda Holston, Assistant Athletics Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, University of Iowa. So as we get started, I want Dawon to kick us off and really explain what is a DEI ban and why should the athletes and administrators, faculty here, why should they care about it?
So there we go. So a DEI ban, diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's happening around the country is that state governments are essentially passing legislation to say you cannot use state funds to pay for anything that promotes race, ethnicity, conversations around racism, all those types of things. Right now, there's, as of last month anyway, 28 of 50 states have introduced some legislation. And what that means for athletes is, I want a quick raise of hands by everybody in the room. If you know somebody that works at a multicultural center, Black student center, Asian American center, Hispanic center, et cetera, somebody on your campus, raise your hand. So that's a good chunk of the room. What that means is that center is not gonna get the resources they need to help their students or help you. And whoever, additional thing, if you Greek, raise your hand. Your chapter advisor who might be doing some DEI work might lose their job because they ain't got the funding and the resources they need to help and support y'all or help and support the students that they work with. And so there's a direct correlation to your experience as student athletes because the connection to campus really helps your experience. And if the fund is not there, like AJ said earlier, you know, you might bring 10 to the Black Student Athlete Summit, it might be 2, or it might be none in the future. So that's the real connection in regards to what it looks like for college athletes.
And just to add further to contextualize that, we're talking 80 bills at the state and federal level. 14 states have already passed legislation. That's Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, North Dakota, South Dakota. So just really to bring this to the fold. Dr. Kelly, can you share with us the real impact of these bans upon people, given your own lived experience?
Absolutely. So you all know I was at Texas for the last 16 years, got my master's and PhD, and working with the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. And part of the reason why I had to change my team and going to UVA is that, of course, this thing was coming down the pipe. And so certainly people were already starting to jump ship even when the legislation before was even passed. But now we've seen the impact directly on Black people and Black women especially, who are in a lot of these diversity roles because, again, many of these schools haven't done their job in terms of diversifying their faculty and staff at all. And so a lot of the DEI pieces were brought in, the organizations were made, and then they brought a lot of Black people through these different organizations and channels. And so the collateral damage to Black people especially is critical. And so not only are we seeing it from the people who are leaving, but also the people who remain behind. So I think about my brother Malik Crowder and the more pressure that he's under to continue to support the entire Black community now that many of his colleagues, our friends, folks that we have worked with for years to build up a lot of the programs on campus, now a lot more students are going to be having to come to him because there's not a lot of us around. So it's going to also impact the folks who are left behind who are still on campus to then have to then already deal with a Black tax. We already deal with a Black tax in higher ed in terms of having to do additional mental responsibilities that our white colleagues and other folks don't have to deal with, right? Because of the lack of numbers on our faculty and staff, many students come and seek us out for advice, for letters of recommendation, for support to go to different conferences, events, and things of that nature. And so a lot of our white colleagues don't have to go ahead and mentor all these other students. And it's not to say that we don't want to mentor, but at the same time, we don't also want to be tired and also run ragged to the point where we're burnt out either. And I'm afraid that it's going to burn out a lot of our colleagues because they're trying to do so much, not only just to continue their job, but also continue to support all the students who still need that support structure for them. And it's also impacting the support structure for our Black faculty and staff as well. So going back to looking at the Texas example, our Black Faculty and Staff Association, they can't meet on campus. They can't have university funds. They can't meet on university time. Right? So now you have these employee resource groups, which have been critical to making sure that Black faculty and staff have a good network of folks to be successful, then that's gone. Or they got to meet off campus, or they got to meet on personal time. And so that also just adds to another level of complexity and a burden for Black faculty and staff to continue to do this work while they're still there. And the last thing is that now we have to also, many of our Black faculty as well and staff, they have to change their programming, or they have to think about what they're going to say next because they don't also want to have the target on their back.
And this is people's livelihood. So Dawon and Darren, can you just highlight what type of chilling effect this creates on campus, this notion of fear that can set in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, some of the class content, I think even some professors have even altered class names, class content. We've also seen certain programming, again, have to be more open, inclusive, right? And I'm not saying inclusivity is bad, but at the same time, when you have a program specifically designed for Black students to address Black needs and understanding the history behind why Black students are dealing with these situations on predominantly white institutions and campuses, right? Then having to change that up loses a little bit of the direct impact in terms of making sure that our Black students feel that support to be able to get through to graduation.
And I'll add to just like a more practical example, right? If you label something again as DEI, Black, et cetera, right? This notion of the chilling effect makes people think who are not attached to it, what are they talking about? What are they doing? You could be planning a cookout that y'all just trying to kick back, listen to Frankie Beverly and Mays, get some good food, and they think that you in there talking about taking over the campus, right? And you might be, but the chilling effect is I need to figure out what they're talking about because my demise might be attached to it when that's quite literally usually not the case.
Sheridan, can you highlight how this is a form of anti-Blackness, but also how we got here? Coming, again, 4 years ago, the world screaming Black Lives Matter to the world now, to the United States and our respective states putting in essentially anti-Blackness policies. How did we get here, and what should we be thinking about, particularly from an administrator standpoint, but also an athlete standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm assuming when some of y'all saw this topic, DEI is dead, you were like, dang, they gonna start like that? Yeah, we gonna start like that, okay? But I'm a metaphorical thinker, so I'm gonna provide a metaphor. So who in here likes flowers? My favorite's roses, so you can put your hands down. But when you think about, you can go to the grocery store and get yourself a cheap bouquet, etc. But that's not what happens is it doesn't matter what type of vase it's in, it doesn't matter how pretty the assortment is. When you take it home, it's gonna last a couple days, but then it's gonna die, right? All the flowers die that you bring home. And I say that to set up from a contextual perspective is that those flowers that you bring home are not in an environment to help them grow, help them thrive, help them to create root, because they're pulled out of that environment, right? So for a contextual perspective, DEI is proverbially a bouquet. It's a bouquet. Meaning, when George Floyd was murdered, all of these institutions, leaders, et cetera, went to the local grocery store and picked out the prettiest bouquets. They were putting in, they were putting out statements. They created positions like ours. They wanted to make sure y'all had resources to do your Heritage Month stuff. They wanted to make sure you could do cookout stuff, right? But what naturally happens to anything that's supposed to have root to grow, if it is not in an environment where it's invested in, there's accountability, there's reporting structure that sets people up for success. It's not just one person's job. When those things don't happen, it's gonna die. So DEI, again, from a start to George Floyd's murder to now where we're at, we are in a post-George Floyd era, y'all. I knew, Dawon and I, had the opportunity of doing this work full time before George Floyd was murdered. George Floyd was murdered, and these positions started to quite literally pop up like daisies. And we were watching it like, wow, we're doing this. But, as I said, those flowers had no roots. They were there to look pretty. They were there to check a box. And so what that means is we are now in a space and place where I want all of you to even think about, what were you doing in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered? You were probably using your voice, speaking out maybe a little bit more boldly. You were being more intentional about maybe learning about the history that we weren't taught about our own people. You were not as afraid to maybe use your voice. But in that same breath, all y'all were posting up at the cookout when we got done with COVID. Everyone was participating in the Black Student Athlete Alliance, et cetera, et cetera. But now there is so much in front of your faces that distract you from your personhood and the people that are there to support you, that it's slowly but surely waning away. The flowers are dying. And so I like to say, I like to use little quotes and things, but I want to be a tree planter. I want to plant trees that have roots. I want them to go deep to the place where they can impact generations to come. I don't want to plant seasonal wildflowers that people can pluck, look pretty in a bouquet, and then die off. So what I ask you to think about as you're about to go through this experience, are you going to be a seasonal flower planter, go to the grocery store and just pick it up for it to look cute for a second, or are you gonna go plant roots? And planting roots is hard, it's hard work. You can't just say that, right? And so from the pre to the George Floyd era to the post, we need tree planters. We can't have people that say they care about things temporarily and then ultimately just when other, shiny dangly things, whether it's NIL, whether it's Alston, whether it's, there's so much in front of your faces, but don't lose sight of the fact that you are a human and you need to care about yourself as a human.
Yes, Sheridan. I was gonna tell them to clap, but they felt it too. They felt the spirit move with that one too. For those of us on Twitter, particularly Black Twitter, we saw a trend going around that basically DEI has become the new N-word. We saw the mayor of Baltimore be blamed for the bridge collapsing, tragic. And someone was saying it was DEI that did this. DEI is the reason the bridge collapsed. And so Lorenda, is DEI just a new N-word and we Blacks just need to get with it? Can you explain that for us?
I think it just really depends on who you ask. So, right, I think about when I'm talking to our administrators, state legislators, I think that it's become the new woke, right? Like it's the new naughty word. And so for me, I have to be able to say, well, if we're gonna get rid of this program that targets Black students, are we thinking about those students who are also first gen? Are we thinking about those students who have a learning disability? Are we thinking about all of those things because those also fall under the DEI umbrella, right? So if we remove those things, now we double down on something that impacts all of us, whether we're talking about Black students or not. So I think it's important for me and my role to continue to educate white folks on that so that my students don't have to. Because what I can't do is allow my students to have that burden on themselves when they're just existing, right? So I would think that it isn't, but it is, depending on who you ask. Yeah.
Naya, you are representing the NCAA, and so we would love to just hear from you from an NCAA perspective on how do we make sense of these bans? What's the office doing, and how can institutions and athletes and administrators alike have the support of the NCAA when thinking about these bans?
Yeah, so the NCAA, we work for you all. We're governed by the membership. And when it thinks about the bans, we have athletics, diversity, inclusion designees. How many of you on your campus know who your ADID is? Called athletics, diversity, inclusion designee. Okay, well.
Come on, UW, raise your hand. I need y'all to act like
Everyone's
don't embarrass
supposed to
us up here.
have
See you
one.
and UW, raise your
Some of
hand.
them are sitting on the stage with me. I know. So every athletic department and conference office has an athletics, diversity, inclusion designee. That was legislated since 2020, August of 2020. Now, when it comes to the DEI bans, what we say as an association is if you are in a state like a Texas, like a Florida, and your school says, hey, you can't have that, then as an association, we can't make you go against state laws. However, we are here to support you as student athletes, and as the panelists talked about your multiple identities, like I work in the Office of Inclusion. My job is to help coaches, administrators, other staff that I work with understand that you have other identities outside of being a student athlete. And those identities need to be supported, nurtured, provided for. You need to have those resources. And so as an association, we have to do that. And Sheridan talked about the post-George Floyd. When I started working at the NCAA in 2019, there were certain things that I wanted to do regarding diversity and inclusion. And I was told, oh, we can't do this. We can't get ahead of the membership. And I was like, okay, well, what does the membership want? And then when George Floyd got murdered, it was like, oh, well, because you as student athletes were speaking out and, wanting to have patches on your uniforms and tweeting and different things like that, then we had to adjust as an association. But because right now, there's not been, the only people who are really seeing stuff are the staff and the coaches who are directly impacted by these laws. And so, y'all heard the news, there's a lot going out with lawsuits, NIL, and those things are very important. But DEI is also important as well. And so what I would encourage you students to do, because I know that your administrators, your coaches are doing it, is to talk about how that impacts you. Talk about the people who are in these jobs and these roles who do the things to help support you holistically as a student athlete matter to your overall development and your overall experience, and question the NCAA of what we're doing. Because when you do that, then we have to respond. President Baker has to respond and say, hey, what are we doing? How can we do this better? So utilize your platform and your voice to make changes, and we will adjust. And we're providing conditional support for the athletics, diversity, inclusion designees. We're providing resources and tools to help students as well in other ways. But when it comes to the anti-DEI, we're again saying if your law is saying you can't have it, then we're adjusting to that. But there are other things that we can do, but we have to have your voice. We have to have your platform to be able to speak up, because you don't realize how powerful you are. No matter what division, no matter what sport you play, your voice, your experience is powerful. So tell us and share that with the world, and we'll make adjustments.
And as we conclude, I just want to share for y'all that we're less than 10 years from when formalized and structured Black athlete programming became a thing, right? Like, I know a lot of us are at places where, we have this year over year, we have this cookout, we have these programmings, we have speakers come in, but this didn't really become a thing until about 2015, 2016. And even then, some of your athletic departments, they might be in year 1 or 2, and it might be athlete run and not really have institutional support. And so I really just want to place the urgency and contextualize that historicity for y'all. And as we conclude here, I want us to, each of you, to have one individual, whether that's athlete, administrator, faculty member, whoever, why is being attentive to these DEI legislation so important? And we'll start with Darren.
I mean, it's important, certainly from a micro perspective, but also from a macro perspective. One of the things that I think for everybody in this room that we have to continue to do, whether you are disheartened by the political process, is that we still got to vote. We still got to vote. Whether you're in a blue state, red state, purple state, this stuff is coming to you. So
Yes.
Even in states where you have, again, maybe a more left-leaning government, right? You still have elements, alumni donors who are saying, we need to go ahead and start addressing this, even at private schools. You see what they did to the sister at Harvard, Claudine Gay. And right, so we see elements of this happening not only at public schools, but at private schools. Your governor is in charge of appointing the board for your public institution. So if your governor thinks a certain way, and certainly is maybe right-leaning, right, they may pick folks who are believe in that political ideology, and even if there's not legislation proposed, they can go ahead and say, the board, just like UNC did, we're gonna go ahead and do this ourselves and take care of it, right? So make sure you should continue to get out and use your vote, and vote down the ballot, not just the president, not just at the high levels, vote all the time, because those folks matter and they make differences when it comes to making sure that either this legislation moves forward or doesn't.
I just want to interject because it may not be public. They're doing this in the middle of the night in some states. Yeah. I just want to be very clear on that. This may not be something that is common knowledge because they're not broadcasting it. It's part of a bigger plan, a bigger scheme. So, Sheridan.
Yeah, well, having to think about giving one piece of advice, but since I have all of you, these systems of places and spaces that you're in say they care about you, but they will replace you very quickly. It doesn't matter if you're a staff, a student athlete, a coach, they will replace you. So in that breath, as the person that does this work at Washington, but I can speak for all of the ADIDs, we need you student athletes to show up to the things that we do, to continue to create credibility, to maintain credibility, because they, even in places and spaces, there's the Texases and the Alabamas and everything, but in all like progressive states, resources have been taken away, people have been demoted, staff have been fired, but that's not the stuff that's out in the works. So you need to come and be involved. And that's not just, come to the cookout. That's important, but we also then need you to be taking what you learn here and not, again, planting seasonal wildflowers and y'all are gonna have fun and you're gonna turn up and da-da-da-da-da, but when you go back, your coaches need to know what this experience was like for you. Yes. So I will say that because I think I can't hint on it enough that we need you to be involved not only in the things that we do, but care about yourself as a holistic human being. Get involved in student athlete development, get involved in NIL, get involved in mental health, because if you don't, you're gonna get done, you're not gonna know where to go, what to do, and that's gonna be on you. Because we're telling you now.
Dawon.
Don't put me next to Sheridan no more. I think my one takeaway really goes to everybody's point, but specifically something you said earlier, AJ. Like with the mayor and the DEI piece, like understand even if you don't do this work, your shadow imagery is connected to it because that's how the world is operating right now. You could be an architectural engineering major and never go to a DEI program ever in your life. And you will walk into a door and people will have preconceived notions about you because you're Black, right? Yeah. And we don't want that to be the case, but today that's the case. And know that these programs are connected to you regardless on if you participate or not. We're asking you to participate so that we can shift the tide in another direction. Yeah. So no, whether you go to stuff or not, it's still gonna impact you. But if you go, the impact could be more positive than negative.
I'll just add that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Yeah. So what you may not think that right now impacts you really does, or impacts the person sitting beside you or the person coming after you. So making sure that you're doing your part, planting these seeds, and using your voice and platform.
And then lastly, Lorenda.
I think I would just add to what both Sheridan and Dawon have shared. When you don't show up, it becomes very easy to erase you. It becomes very easy to erase your experience. So when you don't show up, administration can say, oh, well, what was the attendance? Oh, I had 20 student athletes out of 625 show up. Now we've cut our budget based off numbers. So when you don't show up, it becomes very easy for administrators, legislators to erase you and make you just an athlete. So now we're talking about the business. So if you don't do nothing, show up at least. And also I would add, bring your white teammates with you. We cannot be the only ones telling these stories, right? So when our white counterparts are also telling these stories and being able to share the experience, now it's different, right? And so I would just advocate for that, is that when you show up, show out.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues here. So y'all have been put on notice. Maybe y'all didn't know. That's okay. Consciousness has been raised. The ball's in your court. Thank you.